listen sebab dia yang buat the book cover. Macam at the very end. Ya, sebab before dia okay. I appreciate that. Tak ada apa-apa, tak ada apa-apa. Sorry. Sudah, saya nak start dah. Hello. 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 Alright. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining and welcome to Gerak Budaya. So, Gerak Budaya is good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, for joining us today, and welcome to Gerak Budaya. So, Gerak Budaya is proud to host for the launch of Dr. Jeyakumar Devaraj most recent book, which is Notes on the Way Forward. This session will be moderated by Zahira, so I'll pass the mic to Zahira. So give a warm welcome to Zahira.
Okay, morning everyone. Thank you, Shahira, for the kind introduction. It's really nice to have all of you here today on a Saturday morning to celebrate Dr. Kumar's book launch and in what will hopefully be a very insightful and interesting discourse. So we'll begin today by inviting Dr. Kumar to say a few words on his book and perhaps share the impetus for writing it. So for most of you here, I'm sure Dr. Kumar needs no introduction. He is the chairperson and co-founder of Parti Socialist Malaysia. Previously serving for the Ministry of Health, he left government service to contest for the Sungai Siput parliamentary seat and was the MP of Sungai Siput serving from 2008 to 2018. So 10 very good long years, right? So without further ado, let us welcome Dr. Kumar to the stage.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for turning up to support this book launch. And thanks, Zahira, for the introduction. And thanks to Gerak Budaya for all the work done to make it a presentable kind of a book. Actually, if you look at the book, actually it's like going all over the place, There's many topics all over. And it kind of reflects what PSM is doing. We get involved, we poke our nose into almost everything. Statelessness, forest, labor, migrant, budget, international affairs. We look into all these things, because all these things are important to a society. So the book reflects that involvement, And generally when we look into issues, we not only look into that particular issue and how to solve it, but into the larger ramifications. Why the issue is there? What's the connection with the larger economy? And what are the changes required? What are the laws required, the policies? Because it may sound funny, but we try to think of ourselves as a government in the future. And how would we solve this problem? And that's how we approach this. And so that's reflected in the book. I want to say a few words about some important topics. One important topic is looking at ethnic relations. And our feeling in PSM is racism is institutionalized into the political system itself. At the beginning in the 50s, it was a good system where we had Indians having a party, Chinese having a party, Malays having a party, and they all come together and they shared power. Think about it. would Sambandan ever have been a minister if not for the acquiescence of the Malays? Would Susin have been a minister of finance? So there was inclusivity there. So when people say, you're not being inclusive, that's not true. There was inclusivity. And I think the good things about our country we must acknowledge. People tend to rubbish the other side all the time, but look, there was inclusivity. Maybe you can say they were frightened of the left. They had to be inclusive to make sure they don't go and support the communists and the left, maybe. But there was also generosity. So I think we got to recognize that. But what happened after that is when you have more than one Indian party bidding for the Indian votes, when you have more than one Malay party, then these parties have got to show I'm more Malay, I'm a better defender of the Malay interests than the other fella. So as time went on, they knocked off the left, they knocked off the Barisan Socialists. Then they only had non-socialist parties. And once you had more than one in the racial group, they fight. And they become more and more extreme. To win over the Indian vote, you got to show you're more Indian than the other fella, that your demands are more true, that you're more brave. And in that process, you also demonize the other side. When, for example, non-Malay politicians talk about the quota system, they always talk about ketuanan. Or it's a feeling of what? A right, a right. But they don't. But the thing is, ketuanan only came on in the 70s. Earlier on, the issue was Malays as a society were behind socioeconomically at the end of the colonial period in terms of their profession, their participation in the professions, their academic levels. That is the truth of it. And that is why you had Article 153 to make sure the Malays catch up. Ketuanan came much later, in the 70s. But then when non-Malay politicians talk about it, they always bring in Ketuanan, but that makes people angry, Entitlement, how can, I'm working hard. So that's the problem, So I think the way in which issues are formulated now by our politicians, on both sides, all three major coalitions do it. They demonize the other side. Instead of leading the people towards, rapport and solving problems, of creating understanding of the other side, there's so little of that being done by politicians. So politicians now, I think in the major parties, whether it's BN, even PH, DAP, or PN, are actually making racial issues worse. And we've got to kind of break that. We've got to call that out. We've got to have a different kind of paradigm to understand it. Major problem that our country is facing in terms of race. The other thing is, the other thing that causes a racial situation is there is scarcity. There's economic pressure on the lower 70% of the Malaysian population. Families earning less than $9,000 a month are in financial anxiety. They wonder what's going to happen in the future if someone falls sick, in their old age, who's going to look after them. Education. And it's so unnecessary, So the book analyzes that, how our economy has grown. GDP has grown 24-fold the last 50 years. In real terms, taking away inflation. Really grown. But the distribution of the GDP is very uneven. Only 28% of national income goes to 90% of Malaysians. 56% goes to the top 10% and the companies. So this is an unforced scarcity. When you have scarcity, people are anxious. And then, of course, the school you go to is important. Getting into university is important. Getting scholarships is important. If it was more even, if life was more secure, you won't be so stressed up. So this is also the other part of why there is ethnic tension. It's because there's an artificial scarcity because of the maldistribution of income in this country. The book also talks about the other issue, the underpayment, the wage suppression of Malaysians. Our wages are about 1/8 the wages in Europe, And that means a huge amount of money, We estimate it's about $1 trillion every year is not value created here, is only obtained in Europe or in America. When you produce goods, say worth $2, and that it only paid $2 here. Our capitalist here, Malaysian capitalist, is paid $2. Sells it to the American capitalist who sells it there for $16. It shows up in their GDP, it shows up in their books, not to us. So our workers get exploited, but our local capitalists, pity them, they can't keep the whole exploitation they get, They exploit tremendously, but they cannot keep the surplus. That surplus is taken by the larger people in MNCs. The book also talks about that. The last point I want to bring up, I was told not to talk too long. The last issue talked about in the book is the need for socialists to be realistic, to be aware of the difficulties of transforming to a better society. It's not a question of we take over and everything is going to come right, because we are so deeply integrated into the global system that getting out is going to take time to build the institutions, to build the people, to build the capacity. If you want workers to play a part in running factories, you've got to build all those things. You've got to build the culture, So that's going to be a process. You cannot think that if you take over tomorrow, it cannot be that way. It's got to be a process, and part of the process is if you take over, you'll be managing a capitalist economy. And you can't kick out all the capitalists. You do that, you're dead, you don't have jobs. You've got to coexist for a length of time while you humanize the economy, while you socialize the economy, while you build workers' cooperatives, worker-run things, and capacity, the technology, that takes time, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So you got to think along those lines. You cannot just think that magically, past things like that. Take over Islam, God smiles on you, everything will be okay. No, cannot. You need to have specific roadmaps, plans, how to transition. And I think we've got to be realistic about that, because only when we are realistic and we've got a clear roadmap that makes sense, will people support us. Otherwise, you say it's all pie in the sky, you guys are going to mess up the economy. And that is a fair worry. They take over a complex economy and you do things and you scale foreign capital and you don't have markets and you have unemployment and people get a little more angry. That's a mess. You can make a mess if you mismanage it. So I think for people to feel worried about that, I think it's a fair question people ask us. So we must mark up our game and say this is how we will do it. We recognize all these things and this is how we will do it. So with that, I'll stop here and thank you again so much for attending.
Right, thank you, Dr. Kumar, for that very thought-provoking speech. We will now be playing a short video montage to launch the book, after which we will invite our panelists for today, Professor Munira Alatas, as well as Jeremy Lim, up for a quick photo. Prof. Munira and Jeremy, please come to the stage so we can take a quick picture. All right, thank you so much to the panelists. And with that, the book Notes on the Way Forward, A Socialist Perspective by Dr. Jeyakumar Devaraj has been launched successfully. Another round of applause, please. We'd also like to give a quick shout out to Jason S. Gunnison, the designer of the cover of the book, for his really good work. I'd like to invite Jeremy Lim and Professor Munira back to the stage to start our knowledge sharing session and discussion. So before we begin, allow me to introduce our panelists for today. So on my left, you have Professor Sharifah Munira Al-Atas. She is the former Deputy Director and Principal Research Fellow at the Alliance Center for Governance, University Malaya. Previously a visiting professor at the Indonesian International Islamic University, UIII, after retiring as an assistant professor of strategic studies and international relations at the National University of Malaysia, UKM. Educated in the US with a doctorate and MA degree from Columbia University, her scholarly interests and writings focus on decolonial thought, geopolitics, foreign policy, non-Western international relations theory, and autonomous social science traditions. She is the immediate past chair of the Malaysian academic movement, also known as Gerak. Professor Munira has published 3 books so far, the most recent being Ivory Tower Reform, A Vision for Higher Education in Malay. And she has 2 more books in progress. So if that wasn't impressive enough, she is also the national and Asian indoor rowing champion and record holder for her age group in the 500 meters and 2000 meters categories. So wow, very impressive. Right, and to her right, you have Jeremy Lim, who is the writer and editor of the socialist publication Jentayu, and a member of the Thai collective Dinding. He writes on political economy, socialist strategy, and left history. He is also the project coordinator for DEMO, a history of Malaysian protests, and holds an MPhil in development studies from the University of Cambridge, studying the phases of political economic development in Malaysia. So our 2 panelists will be talking about some of the issues highlighted in the book, broadly on the ethnic relations and how that has shaped the role of Malaysia, and the transition towards socialism. And this will be around 15 minutes each, after which we will then move into the Q&A session. So I'll pass the floor first to Prof. Munira to share some of your thoughts.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the last bit as well. You forgot to say that I have been at it. It's a pandemic ambition of mine. I decided to do indoor rowing because during the pandemic we couldn't go outdoors. Okay, thank you for your brief on, Dr. Kumar, your brief on the book. I enjoyed reading it very much. I was actually a bit surprised that Dr. Kumar had invited me to be on the panel. I knew of the book, I just hadn't read it yet. So he gave me the choice of agreeing immediately or to read it first and then decide. Now, of course, I wouldn't do the second, because that would mean if I said, no, I can't do it, and gave some excuse, it would mean that I didn't like the book. Anyway, the point is, it was an excellent read. I have a few things to say about the various topics that is mentioned in the book, but overall, let me give you my impressions overall. Basically, I'm really drawn to the fact that he focuses on the socio-economic problems and challenges and does not specifically focus on the ethno-religious polemics. Okay, there are ethno-religious reasons for problems in the country, but he doesn't speak of the polemics, or he doesn't polemicize it. Now, I'll say more about this later. He is also correct, and I'm of the same opinion, that the racialized narratives in our society, specifically by the politicians, have been manipulated by the ethno-religious thinking about how society is meant to be. Whereas the most important aspects of challenges begin with socio-economic challenges. And this is never, it's not highlighted specifically by politicians. There are definite reasons why this is not so, is so. But in our society, it's a very top-down transmission of narratives. Politicians start it, the masses pick it up, and then it becomes a perpetual circle. But from my perspective, we can change this dynamic through education. As we mentioned earlier, it's a very long process. It will take, I mentioned 2 to 3 generations, and that was surprising, but okay, let's say 1 to 2 generations. We need to change the system, but so far my disappointment is we speak of reforms, and there are very good reforms so far, which I will mention later. I'm not saying this government has not embarked on any reform. That would be insincere and dishonest. There are some good reforms taking place, but my disappointment is with the education system. Nothing of meaning and concrete in terms of reformatting the mindset of society through education has taken place yet. And I recently did launch a book in this very place, which talks about these problems. And so far, the momentum is very, very slow. Now, another part of the book which really needs to be publicized among the Malaysian society and the masses is the role of geopolitics in how the country is, how the country focuses on development. You know, you mentioned de-dollarization. That's an important aspect of how our economy has been oppressed and dominated. And it's not just Malaysia, it's basically the global majority. Dr. Kumar tends to use words like, which is accurate, global south and third world, yes. But my approach right now in the so-called postmodern era is to use terms like global majority, because that's basically what we are. The post-colonial countries of the third world are the majority countries in the world in terms of population, in terms of land mass. So changing a mindset is important, and to do this, we need to change certain terminology or concepts. So this is not a criticism of the terminology used in the book, but it's an additional plea to kind of educate the younger generation into seeing it differently through the use of new concepts. It's not a new concept internationally, it is being used, but within the rubric of decolonizing literature and debates. So it hasn't reached Malaysia yet, but it should. Another issue I'd like to mention, which I gathered from reading all the chapters, the basic message and the basic issue you are dealing with is corruption and the abuse of power, actually. That's the way I see it. And it's because of this value system of elitism and valuing excessive wealth. It leads to corruption. It's not that poor people are corrupt because they don't have money. Yes, maybe they are corrupt because they don't have money, but who are they learning it from? They are learning it from the excessively rich capitalists who are also corrupt. So this to me is an important aspect of the book. So I see it as focusing on corruption and the abuse of power by the elite, the political elites who are linked and in partnership with the corporate sector. We have a lot of problems in higher education in our universities because of the corporate culture nature that academia has become. So it is no different, the kind of nonsense that goes on in the universities. And we have MACC basically, I mean, it's very clear we are knowledgeable of what has been happening with UKM. Which I used to teach there for decades, and I can mention it publicly now that because UKM is a microcosm of what is happening throughout higher education. But let's see what will happen in the next few years, whether there will be further exploits of this corporate mindset and willingness to oppress those who do not have the riches. It's an honest book, it's a realistic book. Because from the outset, start, you, in your note to the reader, I think, you had mentioned this is to something to the effect that we do not want to criticize for the sake of criticizing. We need to find solutions. You have mentioned that it is not right and honest to criticize the government, the current government, because they have done some good as well, and even the past governments. You also mentioned about the electrification of the rural parts, which is a positive development. And you know, let me also I have notes, okay? Let me scroll down to some of the positive reforms so far. Now, I'm actually saying these positive reforms first before I move on to some clobbering remarks. But the achievements so far, and let's be honest about it. The abolition of the mandatory death penalty, for instance, okay? We have the Public Finance and Fiscal Responsibility Act. That is a few years ago. Now, the Malaysian Harmony Charter of 2024, yes, it's a positive development in the right direction, but it's useless if it's not implemented and if there's no follow-up. Same thing with the Malaysian Media Council, but so far I think I'm reading some good feedback, especially the latest one with respect to the unfortunate FMT journalist. And then the 10-year limit of the PM, that is a positive development. Okay, well, we have some positives. The negatives, though, as I started earlier saying, is in education reform. That hasn't happened. But following what has been mentioned by Dr. Kumar about how to move forward, allow me to link it with my vision or perspective of reform. I honestly think the country will not move forward unless we reform how the kids are being taught. So I will move to education reform. First of all, we need more research to assess the Bumiputra Malay low income. I don't think there is any honest, brave, data-driven research about this, because it's forever considered a sensitive topic. Now, universities won't embark on this. Maybe they are, I don't know. But universities may refrain because there are certain regulations in place that beat in the fear of doing such research into the academics. So there is the fear factor that's there. more research needs to be done to expose the attitude towards dependency on subsidies. I don't think we have solid evidence whether the people actually want this subsidy culture. I mean, as I'm saying, bottom to the people to ask them, are they happy and satisfied with subsidies? Would they be happy with competition, for instance? Again, don't misunderstand me. I'm not against subsidizing those who are really in need of it. But then it has to be targeted subsidies, which you're aware that this is being talked a lot about. I don't think a T20 or an upper middle class person who is buying her third house or needs to get a 7% or 6% discount. So, but that's happening. All right, now let me mention something about the world order dynamics, which you have mentioned in many parts of the middle of the book, about geopolitics and how it is impacting our economy. Yes, we are facing a problem because of the domination of a few rich countries with the colonial behavior that used to happen in the 17th to 19th centuries against impacting us in the global majority region. It's still happening, although we don't consider it colonialism anymore. It's neo-colonialism, it's hegemonism, it's intimidation, it's also bullying. That's basically it. The bigger countries are bullying us. So there are a lot of chapters worth reading closely, slowly, about how ASEAN can get out of this. And I appreciate that part of your book. Perhaps during the Q&A, they can ask you questions and you can answer properly. But really that aspect of the book I consider very informative, and it should, in fact, I would say I hope the book is translated into Bahasa Melayu, because it is an aspect of the discussion that is not very popular. It's not popular when we talk about domestic politics. But there is such a strong link there that I think most of the Rakyat don't know how to make that link. Even in the universities, the link is not made there in everyday lectures. Lecturers are not seeing that link, are not able to see a bigger picture that way. Now, I would like to say a word about socialism. Socialism and ethno-religious relations in the country. First of all, Gerak Budaya actually recently published a book, Islam and Socialism, which was written by my father. The original book was written in Malay, translated by my niece into English. But I'd like to say something about the subject matter. There is absolutely no conflict between Islam and socialism. It's just that the understanding, the conceptualization in this country is that socialism equals communism equals radicalism equals violence. And also socialism supposedly equals anti-religion. But that is completely wrong. There are aspects of socialists who believe that religion is backward and it should be removed from any form of socialist activities. But that's not the majority, or that's not what socialism really means. The basis of exploitation, alienation, and corruption, these are the main problems affecting many Muslim majority countries, including in Malaysia and of course in Indonesia. these are precisely these are the precise problems and challenges that Islam as a belief system is against. And this is the challenges that socialists take up. Yet we leave out, we don't want to educate the masses about how Islam supports socialist work. And I think it's important to get this message out to the majority of Malaysians, because we are not aware. We think socialism is actually Marxism. It's not. I mean, there are aspects of, in the origins, yes. We celebrate May Day, Labor Day. It stems from Marxist thinking. Yet we leave that part out. So I think there's a lot more educating that needs to be done. Now, so basically what I'm saying is socialism is compatible with Islam, and that narrative needs to be perpetuated. Now, I think I'm going to stop. Is it 15 minutes? More than 15 minutes? Oh gosh, all right. All right, maybe I'll stop here. We can speak more later. You should warn me. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your insights. So the need to reform education, the perils of corruption and abuse of power, the misconceptions of socialism as well as neocolonialism. I'm sure many of you have burning questions for Prof. Munira, so do note them down and you can ask them later in the Q&A session. But for now, let's hear from Jeremy Lim.
Thank you. So the way I'll start out the presentation is, why I would recommend this book to everyone. But just really three basic points. I think one, the book also reflects the long work of ESM, working with all segments of society, estate workers, the stateless, squatters, in particular the recent Kampong Papan issue. We've been following that very closely. Aside from that, what Prof. Munira discussed, which was they're grappling with national politics, ethnic politics. So that is something worth buying the book for. The last bit is the bit I will talk about, which is the transition to socialism, and to seriously think about what it means to take power. And I would recommend reading the sort of middle section of the books, essay 17 to about 20, to be specific, because I think it reflects someone who's thought seriously about the challenge of taking power. Of course, there is this imagination, and of course there would be a lot of jubilation if socialist government came to power in many countries, for those of us who believe in the project. But the challenges that we face when taking power would be immense, not just because you deal with a state that is socialized in either the corruption culture that we spoke about, or just the sense of propriety, right? This kind of neoliberal sense that, reproducing capitalism takes precedence, otherwise they won't have a job. The civil servants themselves indirectly kind of reflect this idea that ministries, no matter is it the education ministry or specifically the agriculture ministry, their revenues are dependent on capitalist reproduction. The system, they would be out of a job. The state could collapse if capitalism doesn't continue. So I think to think about that seriously is, definitely worthy of some commendation. And so the essays reflect that. So I'm thinking about the essays about economic challenges of building socialism in a society where you imagine socialists come to power, capitalists go on strike. What do you want to do, right? Do you want to hem them in and force them to turn over their capital? That could end very badly. So if we were to think about what that could look like, right? And I think the discussion that we went through was on Mexico, right? So I'm going to give the specific example of Mexico where Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO, came to power in 2018 on a popular platform very left-wing, basically campaigned to empower workers. He himself was not a creature of its feminist records, the large-scale femicides. They talk about corruption still being endemic. Specifically, they're looking at also AMLO's relationship with basically I shouldn't name names, the Syed Mokhtar of Mexico, right? Carlos Slim. I think it's on record already, so it's fine. So these compromises, people continue to harp on. People continue to talk about, how these are compromises that would taint the project, that would, completely destroy the party in due course. But the party still stands. Claudia Sheinbaum was re-elected and have a popularity and approval rating of 85%. This is not an accident. The project is one that is coherent. It has follow through. And if you think about what it takes to retain an 85% approval rating, you've really got to find ways to touch everyone, right? And they've done things like doubling the minimum wage, increasing the pensions, and I think most controversial of all that I found is that they absorb former PRI, so it's the equivalent of PSM coming to power tomorrow, and I'm no politicians pledging allegiance to PSM, and PSM saying yes to taking them, right? It looks crazy. I think I even saw one quote that it was the activists within the party saw it as an invasion by this former dominant party. But despite these contradictions, right, and despite the perception of corruption, I went to look it up. Mexico on the perception index scores 140 out of 180 countries, right? Still perceived to be a very corrupt country. But 85% approval rating is nothing to scoff at because it maintains momentum for them to continue to build their project despite the contradictions. They have contradictions like they have not touched the income tax. They refuse to tax the workers that they have given benefits to by creating jobs, by giving out pensions. They continue to keep the tax base as is, to not disrupt the status quo. This might change in the coming days, but this is the compromise. This is one of the compromises that people have identified about their project. But it continues to go on. They have, as far as I'm aware, AMLO and Claudia have not faced coup attempts. They've not been kicked out by Western powers. The opposition remains weak, fractured. Even that former left-wing party he was from allies themselves with the right and still cannot win an election. Former PRI governors continue to pledge allegiance to AMLO and Claudia's project. So the reason I bring up Mexico in so much detail is because it reflects a very strategic movement towards socialism, right? You can have a situation where you win power without your popular base, your infrastructure, your machinery, your ability to touch the masses in place. You will lose within one term or be kicked out sooner without popular support. You need that infrastructure, you need that power built before you take office. And that is something that I think Dr. Jaya has spoken about, PSM has also thought about, and it's reflected in the kind of discussions that are in this book. And so the last point I'll end off is Dr. Kumar's kind of reflections about the human factor in socialism. Something that I thought a lot about also is that, if we were to have socialism tomorrow, what would it look like? Would it still have markets? Would people revolt because they don't have choice at the supermarket? You'd be forced to be like, here's your 10 list of items that you go back and cook with every day, and would people revolt over something like that? Right? Consumerist culture has penetrated so much of our lives. Would there be riots on the street if tomorrow Shopee, Lazada, and all of them were gone, and you had to go to the state-mandated store and take your list of items, right? That is a human factor to consider, because in a society where it seems like Malaysia has a lot, we have productive capacity, we have the capacity to produce all these consumer goods. So we may be out of the situation that the Soviet Union was in. Soviet Union was dreary because you had only one kind of genes you can choose from. But that is a human factor to really consider when it comes to who should be in charge of the economy. Should small businesses be given a space within the coalition as exploiters of a lower degree. Right? I don't know how else to say it. But these are serious considerations because in a country where union density is low, class consciousness is low, where are our options for coalition partners? We have to really build it from the ground up. And so I enjoyed the book because it gave those questions serious thought, something that I thought about a lot because, it can be really easy to be depressed about the state of Malaysia, right? But these questions are not impertinent because if you accidentally find yourself in power, it's best to have thought about these questions like long and hard. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Yes. Right, so thank you, Jeremy. You highlighted on the importance of building the capacities to allow socialism to thrive, as well as to consider the realities on the ground when we imagine a better future. So thank you to both our panelists for the insightful sharing session. With much to think about, perhaps this is a good segue to move into the Q&A session. Now, before we begin, I would like to kindly remind the audience to briefly introduce yourself, keep your questions concise and pointed, and to address the questions to the panelists. More importantly, although we do welcome progressive discourse in the space, to keep this a safe one, please be respectful of each other, and we will not tolerate any form of prejudice, racism, or harmful questions. So with that out of the way, I open the floor to questions. You may raise your hand and a mic will be passed around.
Hi, my name is Ann Teo. I'm a member of Aliran. Okay, I have a very basic fundamental question regarding lifting people out of poverty. When you earn an income, it is because you value add. You put value to a process and therefore you earn something. So in one of my discussions with a friend, he threw me this question that I could not answer. Now, I have sold my time and skills to earn my money. Okay, so likewise, if you catch fish and then you have a small pond and you sell fish, then you earn money from those fish. Now, so or you work in you pluck some fruits and you earn money from there. So now, he builds a big farm, either for fish or whatever plantation. So the owner of capital makes money because he owns the capital. Now, if you are the guy who used to fish and you now work in a bigger factory, why should you earn more? What value do you bring to the process that has brought more income to the factory? Now the factory from earning 1,000, from being able to produce 1,000x, now it can produce 1 million. But you are still that one person, so why should you now don't create more value for the company? So how do you lift such people out of poverty? I don't know whether cooperatives or what, but I think it's a question that I could not answer. My question to Dr. Jeyakumar. Thank you.
Thank you. My name, well, I think I'm a member of Aliran, but I won't say it upfront because I'm second or third generation. Not from USM, nothing to do. But the issue I want to raise is the reason I wore this t-shirt. It's linked to our good friend who left us, Haris Ibrahim. Okay, and I saw my colleague not somewhere here, so we are both PTD officers. So I asked, as a guy who has worked in government for 33 years, then retired. Okay, zero corruption, didn't take 1 cent, didn't even donate 1 cent. But my question is this: if we succeeded with the NEP for the first 20 years, which I believe we did, And if we successfully transformed one entire generation of agricultural peoples out of agriculture into industry and mostly in IT, why don't we cry about that success? Why are we shy about saying we succeeded with the NEP? We actually did. I don't think there are too many countries in the world, they have transformed one generation of people. See, I was studying at George Washington in DC. I met all these Malay students. I walked up to them. I sit, they don't know who I am. They think I'm Iranian or Pakistani or Bangladeshi or something like that, okay? I go and ask them, where are you from? They say, we're from Malaysia. What did you do? From fishermen, agricultural community. What are you studying? I'm studying engineering. There were about 100 of them at George Washington, all on Petronas scholarship, doing engineering or IT. I mean, that's in one generation. And it was transformative. But we have not written about it. And I glanced through, I just got the book today, so I haven't read it yet. But I glanced through the topic, it doesn't address NEP at all. Okay, institutionally or as a policy proposal. So that's my question. We have succeeded with the NEP. But this next generation of the damnos, as I call them in my writing, they decided to make wealth their agenda. They became capitalists along the way. They lost. I started work with Tun Razak, so don't misunderstand me. The father, not the son, by the way. He was a genuine public interest personality. He wanted to do what is good for the country. Felda, Mara, Pelkra, all creations with that agenda. But along the way, kept in the agenda of I must get rich along the way. How did that creep in? And how do we address that problem today if corruption is become mainstream? For those who don't know, I stood at the last election and lost a lot of money, 100,000, okay? Because we stood as bebas. Nobody respects bebas. And then they give you a kunchi or a gajah or a banana as your symbol, you know. But surely we have a great story to tell, and we can improve on that story for the next phase of Malaysia. But why is, with due respect, Anwar Ibrahim also forget all this? Because he was talking all about it on campus, as best as I remember. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Obel. I'm a PhD student in political science at Northwestern University in Chicago. Although most of my work here is related to international political economy, especially with China, India, engagement in Malaysia, I wanted to ask a question that probably resonates more with you, Jeremy, and that is related to how does one overcome just the immense incentive structure of people who tend to be very apolitical and think about their career path and everything and think, oh, I don't really want to get involved in such and such a social movement unless it means like I can get a better form of employment and such. And the reason I ask this question is just because as a member of a graduate worker student union, this is something that has been very much at the forefront of minds of my classmates and everything as we try to organize just back in the United States and try to surmount these incentives that are very prominent in the STEM fields and a lot of people that bring in the big bucks for universities. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Subramaniam. By a coincidence, I'm also from Aliran. Actually, I'm the founder of Aliran, one of the co-founders of Aliran. I just wanted to say that I haven't read the book, but I know Dr. Kumar well, and I know his views well. And I think it's important, from his summary, what I gather is socialists have to be pragmatic in the sense that, and it's good that Jeremy mentioned Mexico, because in many countries, like even in Chile recently, the left came to power and now the extreme right has taken over again. Because we cannot be extremely impractical in the way we do things. And I think the word for it is, just as capitalism and privatization, for example, in Malaysia, has creeped into our system over the last 40 years, until we see that as normal, that things being privatized, although it does incredible damage to many things, we can also do the reverse. You can have creeping socialism. You do it slowly. Even if PSM doesn't come to power, they have done some things, like for example, the minimum wage. At one point it was laughed at. People were laughing at the idea of minimum wage. Today it is accepted policy, and I think you have to give full credit to PSM. They are the ones who fought for it. So, I think even if it looks like forlorn hope of PSM coming to power, it doesn't mean the ideas cannot infiltrate. I think that's very important, right? Now, I mean, that's my main point. The other thing is things like what John was mentioning about NEP. Actually, a lot of those successes could have been done without an NEP. Like what Kumar mentioned about rural electrification. I came from a village, not because we couldn't afford electricity. There was no electricity. I was in a Chinese New Village, no electricity, no water supply. I got my electricity when I was in lower 6. Water supply when I was in Form 2. No running water. So that's rural electrification and rural water schemes. So you can introduce a lot of things in a non-racial way. Public infrastructure, good parks, good housing, good schools. And you'll uplift everybody, especially the poor. Because people like us who came from the rural areas actually had in the colonial times, we suffered great disadvantage. It's only the post-colonial period, when the rural development began, benefited all of us. So I think it is so loaded word that now I think NEP is a drag on the economy. It is being used. And we should get rid of all this, basically, and go back to basic helping the whole lot, and basically a policy bias towards the poor. Thank you.
Perhaps we'll stop this round of questions first and leave some time for panelists to answer, and then we'll open up another round after that.
Thank you for the questions. And you asked first about value creation. The question is, okay, let's say the person working in the chicken farm, producing the eggs, let's say he or she is being paid 1,007, the minimum wage. Now, is that a fair wage for them? Taking into account, this now is about $12, 12 US dollars an hour. To calculate that out, the minimum wage per month in Malaysian ringgit in the US is about 11,000 Malaysian ringgit. So if you take minimum wage for that kind of work, is that 11,000 a fair assessment? Okay, you've got to bear in mind maybe US cost of living is maybe double, maybe triple hours, but even this triple hours, 11,000 is about 8 times more. So what is a proper wage? And in the US, the workers will say, people like Bernie Sanders are saying the minimum wage should actually be $17 per hour, not 12. So what is a fair wage for people? And are we achieving that? Furthermore, in many chicken farms in Sungai Siput, they don't even pay 1,007 because there are a lot of illegal migrant workers who run away from their exploitative, abusive employers
and they prepared, now they got no documents. So they work below the minimum wage in Sungai Siput. A lot of them, in the small farms, chicken coops, fish ponds and all that, they work below that 1,007. And of course, the person above them makes more money. So look into all these things. What is a fair minimum wage? What is a fair, if you take the Marxist thing, they say all wealth actually comes from labor. Labor is the source of wealth, nothing else. And the money that put in by the businessman is labor that he has not paid for in the previous cycle. He takes it and becomes his capital. That's how Marxists look at it. But I think let's not go into Marxism, but let's look at what is a fair minimum wage. Is 1,007 fair? Is that even being paid? Or is the US figure 11,000 a month fair? That's the figure also in Australia. Minimum wage is 11,000. So our people are being paid 1/6 to 1/8 the wages of what's being paid in advanced countries. So either you must say advanced countries are paying their workers too much. Those damn workers there are getting too much. They're cheating the bosses. Or the other way around. Here we are being paid too low. I think we've got to look into that. The issue KJ brought up about NEP. Okay, NEP, I agree with you, has succeeded to an extent. It's created a big Malay middle class. Teachers, nurses, even doctors. But even doctors now, it's only about 47% of all doctors now are Malay, not 60%. I haven't fully corrected it, but it's done a big job in that. But if you look at the figures, George, if you look at the figures of, it came out in Parliament in 2023, of the median savings in EPF, Malays compared to Chinese compared to Indians, it's there in a book somewhere. The Malay median is only 1/3 the Chinese median. The Indian median is half the Chinese before the start of COVID. But that indicates in talking of EPF, it's not a small sample. It's about 9 million workers in the formal sector. In the formal sector, the Malay median of savings in EPF, and EPF is by law, you cut so much, 11% plus 13%, 24%, and you put it there. And the Malay median is so low. To me, that indicates the NEP hasn't solved all the problems. There's still, that means the Malays are likely occupying the lower sectors in the formal sector, right? And I think it's a problem that we should take it as, it's not a problem that, UMNO must take up or PAS must take up. It's a problem that any Malaysian should say, why is it that the Malays are earning less than the Indians and the Chinese? What can we do about that? Is it discrimination or is it a lack of education? How can we, it shouldn't be that way. There shouldn't be identification of ethnicity with income. Or you look at SME sectors. SME sectors, let's say if in our idea in the future we want a mixed economy, where we're going to allow small industries, we want to allow a mixed economy where there are going to be small businessmen, then a significant number of small businessmen also must be Malay. It can't all be Chinese. And at this point in time, the Malay involvement in business is either GLCs or the, goreng pisang and the burger stalls. The in-between sector is largely Chinese and a bit of Indian. To me, that should be a problem that affects all of us. You don't have to wait for the Bui Putra economic conundrum to start jumping up and down. We should be saying this is how we got to solve it. So that will be my answer to that. I think NEP has done a lot, but there's still economic disparity, and we got to understand that. And the counter argument you also want to add to that is any affirmative action you give. If you want to give more affirmative action for the Malay community, you must open it up to the B20 Indians and the B20 Chinese who also need it. You want to continue? Let's continue, but don't leave them out. I think, but you can only argue that if you're honest and you accept there is still some catching up to do for the Malay community. Otherwise, you're not going to get the buy-in. Third question, Daniel, you asked. Okay, Daniel, I'll pass it to you. But Daniel, I think this thing of whether they're comfortable with their own lives and their, and how to get them involved. I think, for human beings, if you're not part of the whole, if you're not part of a society, if you're not helping others, you're losing something. You can end up rich, but you end up alienated, Like Durkheim, a sociologist, talks about it, So I think there is a human need for us to be connected, and this is wired into our psyche, by centuries of. See, if you look at, we were hunter-gatherers for about 100,000 years. We only got agriculture about 10,000 years ago. But until that time, we were hunter-gatherers. And a hunter-gatherer team that didn't stick together, that was individualistic, would be eaten up by the saber-toothed tiger or something. So only those communities that had that feeling of looking after the poorer, the sicker, the weaker, the injured, would have survived. And so, like it or not, it's wired into our chemistry, our DNA. And if you're not helping your community, not part of a community, you're not getting that feedback, then you will have a poorer life, emotionally and psychologically. And I believe that. Subra, I agree all with you. And also, incidentally, I'm also a member of Aliran.
I'll quickly address the question about incentive structures when it comes to people who are apolitical. Because I do agree with Dr. Jaya on his point about wanting to be part of a social collective. But I think in this case, sort of demonstrating to people the power of collective action in small ways can help people who are kind of resigned to the fact that nothing can be done collectively, they can come over, they can be converted in that. Because I think in many instances, if we think about the achievements that Malaysian society has gained, a lot of times it's not that the people, came out to the streets and demanded a particular reform and the elites gave in after that popular pressure. The elites themselves took the temperature of the ground and gave people that reform, right? The result of that is that people have no sense of their own power, right? And sometimes you have to demonstrate to them that that power can be exercised by doing things like withdrawing their labor or occupying a space. So sometimes I feel that demonstrating that people have that power is more powerful than just telling them that they ought to do this, that they should feel this way. People feel disillusioned for very obvious reasons, because they've not seen those kind of successes in their lifetime.
Maybe about the last question, Daniel, about the masses, the apolitical aspect of it. Again, I go back to students, all right, because we did used to have a student movement, 40s and 50s, and that has slowly died down, and we've become an apolitical, apathetic student body. I don't blame them, but it's due to legislation. And we have several draconian, or maybe at least 2 draconian laws that prevent students from being party members or from participating in debates on campus about politics. There's some minor reforms lately, but the element of fear is still instilled on campus. So I would say there's also a lack of education in politics, in how at least secondary school students, they don't know the parliamentary system. And now that we have a younger voting age, isn't this an important aspect to include in secondary school education? But it's not done. So there are a lot of intricate problems that need to begin with secondary school, primary school, and even kindergarten. But the problems are we can overcome it if we have a mass movement of parents advocating for this. But that's another discussion, you know. We have, and again, with response to Daniel as well, the problems also lie with the corporatization of the university system. And we have learned that very well from the US, by the way. And I've criticized it in the book, in the recent book that I've written. The issue is how universities are transforming the way we value education. And that has created a problem with whether the masses understand how they are being exploited, or whether they like the fact that they see very rich politicians or not. That's all I have to say.
Right, thank you. So the panelists have addressed questions on fair worker wages, incentive structures for those who may be apolitical, and also the questions on NEP. Can we get the mic? Can we get the mic over there, please? Yes.
Hello. Testing. Hello. Okay. Hi, my name is Noah Fiza. I'm from PSM. My question is for Dr. Kumar. As a practicing socialist doctor, what would be your words of encouragement for today's youth, who most of us nowadays have higher education than our parents and grandparents, but our wage is so low, our basic Maslow hierarchy of needs isn't met even after we try as best as we can from selling our labor. I do understand the biopsychosocial and spiritual model, but we don't have a good governance, so it's hard to be in a good mental health situation in this, hell.
Hi. Sorry, just some quick questions first. Thank you so much. My name is Harmeet, and I'm from PSM as well. Three questions. The first, I think the elephant in the room is race and religion. I don't know if you've discussed it, but we're really stuck that way, right? How do we move forward? We see it with the recent that ex-FMT reporter who asked a really profound question actually during the George Galloway's speech earlier, right? But you know, it becomes sensationalized. How do we have an honest conversation about race? Second, I actually agree that the Malaysian state is I'd say that it's quite successful in its policies. There's that famous book from Jomo and Edmund Gomez, talks about how incentives can align. In many ways, they've been successful in all their policy projects. But moving forward, and I would say the other point is this financialized economy, like the big GLICs and we have the third largest debt market in Asia. How do we make sure that serves the pro rakyat, that is like serves the good for all rather than the few? And the last question will be, even though we have a really large state with a lot of capacity, there's avenues of change include non-state actors like social organizations. Yet civil society is also, I think, a bit paralyzed. Though I think Aliran is a bright spot how do we move forward that way?
Hello, my name is Mark. I'm a Cambridge A-level student from Taylor's College, and I actually would like to, I would love Dr. to answer this question actually, and that is about education reform. As I think most of us here know, what government has already going to implement a new policy, the FTES, Free Tertiary Education Scheme, which basically gives free education, tertiary education for all Sarawakien eligible. So, do you have any comments on that in terms of its the pros and cons? Is it something that's idealistic, something that can be sustainable in the future? And also, do you think would it be realistic to replicate a similar model for most public universities in Malaysia?
One more, maybe two more questions. One from this end and another. Yeah, two more questions for this round.
Thank you. I have two questions. Number one, all right. While the book convincingly critiques, my name is Ramli. It's less detail on policy pathways. How might the ideas outlined be translated into concrete policies without compromising core socialist principles? Question number one. Question number two, short one. Given that the book challenges existing economic and political interests, how is it the government likely to respond to it? Thank you very much.
Yeah, hi. My name is Philip. I'm from PSM. Fortunately, now my couple of comments lah. One of my pet areas of interest, but you could also say pet peeves, is the education system. I think there is too much political agenda to the way the education curriculum has been designed. So, for example, it's important that everyone knows that we taught the Romans how to build ships. But I think the other issue is that I think it is even a deliberate dumbing down of the population because they are easier to control. That is a very, very large part of the agenda behind the current education curriculum. And I think a lot of it is really a class system as well, because the way the subjects are being taught is that you have those up there, you aspire to be up there, otherwise you accept your place down here. So you see how neoliberalism has crept into even the public university system. Forget about the private, because all they want to do is make money. But the point is this, in the public universities, you have now the direct entry system. So you pay exorbitant fees if you want to bypass the quota system as long as you are rich, or at least reasonably well off. So it's all part of this class system as well. So my other question is that just a couple of other things, because you mentioned legislation, there is the UUCA. So I think that has not been repealed. I did my master's in the University of Malaya. We still had to sign the stupid Aku Janji. And I broke every janji. If you want me to list them down, I don't know where to begin. But my question is, how do we readdress all the weaknesses in the current education system so that we build a fairer and equitable society without dumbing them down? All right, so that is my key question. But just the last comment, of course, is the class system. Because a lot of the problems, whether you want to talk about Ketuanan or NEP, beg your pardon, it really boils down to the class struggle. How do we overcome the class struggle? Because the GLCs, all these things, all they're doing is really perpetuating the class system, which keeps the T40 where they are, the T10, let alone 20, up where they are. So it's also about overcoming these problems, these challenges. And I think, although I haven't read the book yet, I got it about a month ago, I think we all want to address the class problem, class struggle.
Can we get a mic on that side, please? The last question for this round.
I'm Sivalingam, education is, and I do disagree that private universities are all for money. We do more than that to make them good citizens. Thank you. My question is related to the new education blueprint that has been churned out recently. And I want some comments about how effective it is going to be, especially in relation to cross-cultural competencies. I think that's one of the most difficult areas, but I'm not sure whether it's being addressed, largely because we have both private educational institutes and also public institutes. Thank you.
Your forbearance, of course. Thank you very much. I'm hopeless in the morning, but let me try and make this as short as possible. My name is Gopal Papachan from Empower, a feminist organization. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Kumar for the book. Thank you very much for the book. Second of all, it's really refreshing to come to a forum like this in a world that is so uncertain and somewhat gripped by despair, with an orange fool in the White House and a somewhat sort of uncertain direction this country is taking. So cutting to the chase, my questions are twofold. I mean, there were a lot of questions on education. I'd like to ask Dr. Munira if she can unfold for us what are the key components of what you see are essential reforms for our country, the education. Second question is to Jeremy. You cited Mexico. I see that Mexico has a legislated quota for gender equality in the country, and so it's no accident that Gloria Sheinbaum is the president, but also more than 50% of the legislators are women in what is a machismo Latino country, right? So how do you see the feminist project aligning itself with the socialist project?
All right, thank you for the questions. Perhaps Prof. Munira, you'd like to address the questions first?
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I may not have got everyone's question, but I think about education, first of all, I won't go by the person who stated it, okay? Sorry about that. But starting with your empower, sorry, what's your name again? Gopal's question first about the key reforms that I see haven't been achieved yet or are not even working towards. First of all, the elephant in the room is political interference in the system. Political interference, and I'm more familiar with the higher education structure, ecosystem. Right from the top of our public universities, how are the vice chancellors, how they are handpicked, how they are connected with several kinds of cables to the politicians, how they come from the fields of their background, educational or employment fields, which do not synergize with running a university. I mean, basically, we have a slew of engineers who are our vice chancellors without any humanities or social science backgrounds. So you can't run a university like that, who basically sees the world as through the lens of, through a capitalist lens to a corporate lens. And we don't have vice chancellors who are criticizing or critiquing the global university ranking system. To me, that there is a big link between the problem we have in our universities with how we are chasing ranks. In the book, please do read. Mark is your name? No, Philip. Philip, please do read the book that just came out a few months ago, which I co-edited, or rather, I edited with two co-editors. It is about, it's titled Ivory Tower Reform, a vision for higher education in Malaysia. You can get it downstairs. The issue is, it is a 300-page book with worthwhile criticisms over the last 30 years of what has been going on in the universities, in the system here. And it is also, there are chapters on how to overcome this problem. But I find we have found ourselves up against the same problem, which is the long hand of politics in education. And mind you, we're talking about a public university. The question of free education. Obviously, a public university needs to provide free education. Sarawak is doing a fantastic job. The point is, even if they have to charge fees, don't make it exorbitant that runs students who graduate into perpetual debt. And in the US, for instance, this is a horrendous, it's a grotesque problem. So we don't want to become like that. Nevertheless, because of the problem of low wages and unemployability, we have graduates who are not getting the jobs that they have been trained for. So they are having to work at jobs that earn less pay. Therefore, they are unable to pay their loans. I am an advocate for free education for the public system. Whether we do it, whether we can or do it or not is not because it's unrealistic. It's because we have politicians who are interfering in the system, who are using the system to generate money. So, I mean, this is this vicious cycle. I don't know if any blueprint, I've written about it immensely over the last several years, education blueprint after blueprint. Useless. The point is we have fantastic ideas, great rhetorical statements and jargon. Where's the implementation? And if you look at it, one blueprint after another is a rearranging of sentences and paragraphs, new terminology which mean the same thing. So I'm sorry, I'm getting a little annoyed with this, not with your question, but with the point of blueprints, because it is a rubber stamp on the politician who eventually will leave office, take over by somebody else. That is her or his legacy. Getting down to the human factor, are our politicians concerned about the people, about society, about advancing society? No, I don't. That's where the depressing part about our system is. I get very depressed about it because there's so much insincerity. I mean, the current government has a hard time because of how they came into power and how they are trying to stay in power. But I'm not going to excuse the fact that not a single worthwhile education reform has taken place so far. And this is very disappointing. There's still time. I hope it happens. But the criticism or the critiques that I got from my book is basically ignoring all the serious problems, which are academic dishonesty, a lack of university reform, autonomy, and political interference in the universities. Nobody criticizes that because they know it's true. What they criticize is something that most Malaysians tend to accept, which is it's okay for universities to take part in the global university ranking. What's the problem? Competition breeds excellence. Well, yes and no. If you are obsessed with ranking, moving up from 100, place 125 to number 100, please look at how that trickles down into benefiting society. Just because moves up the ranking, have we improved the conditions of the B40 or the B20 or the B50? We haven't. And this is what we're talking about today. Where is the correlation between moving up the rankings and the changes we see on the ground? This is not being discussed. So about blueprints, that's what we should be discussing, but we don't. And it's nonsense, wasting money on badges, jalur gemilang badges, or wearing, I won't even talk about black or white shoes. But the point is, we focus on this, and this is where it is misplaced. It's not because we are ignorant. It is purposely done because we want to deflect away from the fact that politics needs to be involved in education. I mean, that is the way Nelson Mandela has said that about education. You know, if you want to transform a country, you have to transform the education system. But I suppose there is a reluctance to do that. So I think I would stop there. I hope I've answered everyone's question. Philip, yes, the dumbing down is very real. Come back to me later in case I haven't answered. Thank you.
I'll just answer very quickly the point about the feminist project within the Mexican sort of experiment. As far as I'm aware, the feminism did not come up as a kind of almost Western style, like insistence on intersectionality. I could not see that because you hear of Spanish-speaking Western academics constantly critiquing AMLO's project. But if you were to look at the news coverage of the successes of the AMLO and Sheinbaum administration, many of the beneficiaries are women. So they, I don't know if it's by accident or incidentally, are uplifting many women in Mexico. And this does not come from the kind of signaling that they have seen, because otherwise they would have praised it in the pages of Jacobin and like more standard Americanized press. So I think in that sense, basic principles about, you know, lifting people up, giving people pensions, so many of the beneficiaries of these, if you watch these Al Jazeera documentaries that are, I think, somewhat neutral, single mothers were some of the primary beneficiaries, people who are, you know, single mothers who are retired or who rely on pensions and cash transfers. These were the primary beneficiaries of the Mexican project. And I think that is a crucial first step in many cases. That's all I'll say about that. Thanks. Okay. Maybe I'll just add one point to the gentleman who spoke about policy and keeping socialist principles. Because I've heard about plenty of other politicians and academics who've talked about how do you go about governing a capitalist state, right? You're going to have to reproduce the capitalist system every morning when you wake up, and you've got to sign papers. They'll be like, yes, we're transferring money here, transferring money there. I think one thing I found really interesting from this academic Leopanage was that what you do is you push for reforms that intensify class struggle. That, you know, the orientation of the courts to favor workers over corporations, that's something you can institute with minimal kind of opposition straight away. You know, you don't want the capitalists to wake up to their stuff being gone, right? That kind of thing. But to be very conscious that you're not just reproducing the system for the sake of staying in power. You have a project outside the doors of parliament or the executive. I think that's how you kind of enact policy while keeping your socialist principles. Thanks.
Okay, a lot of good questions and a lot of topics. We can actually discuss this for a long time. You know, Hafiza, I think, brought up a very important point about the situation of people today, low wages, and he linked it also to mental health issues. I think you're perfectly right. I think young people now have far more problems than young people did when I was young. You know, we created them. You know, in those days, you know, only a few of us were graduates, so we had jobs. Easy. You know, we could choose our jobs, you know. Things are much more difficult now. And it doesn't have to be so difficult, because if there was that 56% that goes to the top 10%, if part of that, even you bring it down to 46%, you know, 10% goes into government, right? That is, you know, the government can use that, you know, for programs to help. For example, there are so many inner city slums, vertical slums, you know, care workers to work with young people there. There'll be employment. Talking about our rivers, talking about oil palm waste, talking about forest rehabilitation. We could absorb people into those kinds of jobs if the government had more money. So it's a problem that can be solved. And that's why I think any thinking young person should join the Socialist Party, really. You know, really. I mean, that's the way forward, really, you know. Because this system hasn't got a place for you. You know, the way they're going, there's no place for you, really. So I think you know, any thinking person, you know, because we can think a bit more than, you know. All right. Harmeet, you talked about race and religion. I think the important thing here is empathy. You know, if you want to solve this problem, I think Indians should be concerned about the problems that Malays face, that Orang Asli face, you know, and not just shouldly complain about our problems. Of course, we do have problems, and they need to be addressed, but we've got to be aware of the problems the other communities also face and be sincere in trying to handle that. So you've got to come together on a kind of a multi-ethnic group trying to solve the problems of all the groups, instead of staying in our own silos and yelling, you know, which is what's the procedure in place. Okay. Mok, you talked about free education. That's one of our campaigns in PSM. The way we look at it is this, you know.
you want young people to be engineers and doctors and scientists, then say, look, you go and work in Sarawak or you go and work in Terengganu, you help the poor people there. If I will tell you, look, I had to pay the market price. I paid to become a doctor, I paid $500,000. I don't want to. You know what I mean? You have got no moral right to ask someone who's paid the market price, $100,000 or $300,000 to become educated, and then you say you go and work there. Whereas if society itself educates people, then you have an obligation. And then the whole issue is, why do we educate people? So they can become rich? You know? Or is it because then they can serve society? I mean, it comes down to that. What is education for in the first place? You know? So I think the way things are going now is way off the track lah. You know? Ramli, you asked about whether the government will respond. I hope they respond. They won't lah. You know? We're too small. We are inconsequential. So, you know, if they take it seriously and debate, it's good. But I think they will not respond. And regarding how ideas can become policies, I think we got to engage lah. Obviously, the book can't solve everything. It's just putting out ideas. You got to have further discussions and see how we can flesh it out. You know. So I think it is an invitation really for further discussion. It's not a complete blueprint for the country. You know. It's not the Rancangan Malaysia ke 14 or 15. It's not. But it's got ideas. Philip, we talked about education, about reforming it, you know. Actually, I think it's going to be quite difficult to touch the education system because the akmals in the society will jump up and down. And on the other side as well. We're taking away our Chinese schools because it's become a hot issue that both sides use to prove how they are defending their own ethnic group. So even if your intentions are good, it will be misrepresented to be seen as something that is inimical, that is dangerous to my community. Or you're trying to do away with Indians' education, Tamil schools, you know, and everyone will react on those bases, you know, because the politicians don't care about the truth. They care about getting support in their own party. You know what I mean? So I think issues like this can only be addressed when we do the other thing, when we build a multiracial people's movement, addressing common issues, wages, healthcare, pensions, you know, and you do enough of that and build a multiracial group, then we can address the more difficult, straight into issues, you know, like for example, interfaith issues. I've got people who were classified as Muslims but brought up as Hindus, and now when they're adults, they married a Hindu man, but they can't get the Muslim out of their birth cert. You got to go to the Sharia court, they can't go to the civil court, they go to civil court, there's one-to-one, blocks you there, come back here, Sharia courts are so difficult. But addressing that now, frontally, is a problem. It's going to be used as you're trying to undermine Islam. You know? So until we build the counter-narrative on a socio-economic basis, you know, where we get a multiracial people's movement that is politically active in the, you know, quite is a force in the country, then you can bring issues like this up. That's my feeling. Anything else? Gopal, I think we covered that. Gender equality you're talking about, eh? Yeah. I think, you know, I think I told this to you before, I mean, in the People's Constitution, you know, there is something about if you don't have at least 50% Malay members of parliament, the Malay members who lost by the smallest margins would be sequentially added on until you got more than 50%. That is there in the People's Constitution that is prepared by the AMCJA and Putra in 47. So something like that can be done. You don't have 30% of women in a Dewan Undangan Negeri, then the women lost by the smallest margin will be added on until you get the 30%. That can be done quite easily. And that will then make more parties feel women. So I think that's one way we can look at it. And that I think is not too contentious. It can be done. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kumar. A round of applause for the panelists, please. So we have around 10 minutes left, I think, to wrap up. I'd like to give the panelists around 1 to 2 minutes each to summarize a simple call to action for the audience and also for those in progressive spaces to create a more egalitarian and just society in Malaysia. Perhaps Dr. Kumar, you'd like to... Yeah, sure. Unless Jeremy, you'd like to go first.
You should have the last word, Kumar. Yeah. I think there were enough calls to join PSM already. So, yeah, I will not leave you with that. I think for me, yeah, considering how, your lives are kind of interconnected with the system, kind of how you'd like to make that difference. Many of us don't think about how our lives are reproduced by other people, right? In invisible labor, exploited labor. A lot of these are kind of touch points which we could intervene in and allows us to then be connected to the collective and feel a sense of our own agency. So, my own thoughts to leave you with is to, look for that outlet for, socialist change. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Some parting words from Prof. Munira?
Thank you. I don't know if I'm going to have any profound points like Jeremy's, but what I might say might come across as being very naive, but honestly, I think this is the problem we are having, and we have been having since the early 80s and under a particular past prime minister till now. We basically have lost a leadership quality, which is leadership that's genuinely caring, honest, and ethically in line with the teachings of Islam. I use Islam because it is whether we like it or not, it is the religion of the country. It is in the constitution. But for me, that doesn't make any difference in terms of ethics, ethical behavior, serving the public, serving the people. It has become ritualistic. It has become a weapon. It has been weaponized. And I don't... Okay. Thank you. I basically would like to see this. This is the only kind of transformation which can happen via the education system. And we need to introduce, I keep saying that, and maybe one bright spark will come along. After all, we did have a very good vice chancellor in the late 1980s. When Anwar Ibrahim himself invited UM's vice chancellor from Singapore, my father. Of course, he didn't last. We all know why. But nevertheless, we have that legacy. We might have to repeat that kind of legacy for the next 10, 20 years until it finally evokes change. So, for that much, I would say I won't stop harping on this problem of leadership and how they need to reform the education system. I see your point, but I'll stick to my vision as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Munira. And finally, Dr. Kumar.
Okay, a final comment, sir. I think, when you say that our earlier set of leaders in the 50s, 60s and 70s were somehow better leaders, more honest, more responsible. I agree with you there. I mean, they were all anti-communist, But I think, the existence of the communist threat globally and locally kind of tempered the leadership here. They had to behave themselves. They had to make sure they were inclusive. So in a way, even though it's a capitalist
society, we are on the side of America and Britain, they behaved better until the Soviet Union collapsed, you see. Once there was no more threat, and once even China started using capitalism to build up, then the capitalists began showing their true colors because they're no longer scared, you know. And so I think that's the way I understand what's happened in the last 60 years, you know. Initially, we also was a capitalist government, but it was more, I think, if you compare in Sungai Sipur, compare Sambandan, for example, with Samiwelu. There's a big difference. Sambandan used his own property. He died poor because he used his property to build up, you know, various things for the Indian community. Samiwelu was poor when he started, but it's rich when he ended, you know. I mean, and that's true in all the parties, not only, don't laugh only in MIC, okay? Same thing, you know. Early UMNO people were giving the jewelry so Tunku and all could go to England, you know. People were contributing. Now, who now contributes to UMNO? People are all putting out their hand, right? All contractors. So I think that has happened, you know. Okay, so we got to understand, and there's got to link to the whole global situation where capitalism is ruling, you know. So that, I think, you got to link it there. We're not like Soviet Union, but you must say they helped us a lot in having a better society, you know. Now, the other thing is, we are now in a blind alley, really, you know. The way we're handling race relationships, the way we're handling job creation, you know, the way we're handling things is really sad. We're not getting forward. And that's why this book is talking about a reset. We need to look at things differently, change things. Like, for example, we've got to stop thinking from our racial silos, you know, which our political parties have created. We've got to get out of that and think about the other person. There's no other way forward. You've got to think in terms of building a multiracial movement that cares for all the people in this country. And that's what PSM is putting forward. But we're going against the time because 50 years of racialized politicking has poisoned all of us. Me included. I mean, we all think in that way, you know. But you've got to fight that and form a multiracial movement. So what we want is either people join us, or please form your own socialist party or your own progressive party, then we link up as a gabungan, you know. But we need the left to build, you know. We need progressive groups to build, you know. If you're not comfortable within the PSM, it's fine, do it outside the PSM, but then we work together, you know. But we need progressive, multiracial politics that is aware of imperialism, you know, and that is aware of the distribution of wealth, that is glued on. And this book is an attempt to bring us to that kind of a discussion. So I hope we can keep on discussing these things. And thank you all so much for coming.
Okay, unfortunately, that is all the time we have left for today. I'd just like to end with a quote from American activist Maria